So you've always wondered what worm castings are. Well, to be blunt, it's poop. Worm poop. But why are worm castings so good for your garden? Here are the top 4 reasons why any serious gardener should be using them. Worm castings add microlife to your soil. We're talking bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, fungi. But why are these so special? Plants need the microbes in order to break down nutrients into a water-soluble form that then feeds the plant. Your soil could be full of nutrients, but without those healthy microbes acting as a chef, if you will, breaking down those nutrients, your plant can't eat. Worm castings are full of nutrients. When fed the proper diet, castings can be chock full of all kinds of good nutrients. But be sure to feed your worms quality food or buy good castings, because good food in means quality castings out. Number 3, they improve soil structure. Worm castings are great at retaining water, which helps your soil stay moist longer. And they improve aeration, which is especially helpful in the heavy clay soils here in Colorado. Worm castings grow stronger roots. Now that those microbes have fed your plants, your roots are full and healthy. Healthy roots are like a good foundation to a house. Everything built above it will be stronger. Your plant will have better disease resistance, have larger blooms, and be more pest resistant. Now that you know how great worm poop is, you might be curious on making your own. Subscribe to our channel because our next video is going to show you how. Did you know that you can make one of the best all-natural fertilizers and get rid of kitchen scraps? I'll show you how with worms. So one of the best all-natural fertilizers is worm castings, and I'm going to show you how to make your own worm farm. So you're going to need 2 plastic bins with tops. This is a 17-gallon bin. Why do you need 2? Well, when I first started, my bin got too swampy, full of water. So I like to drill holes in the top bin so that it allows it to drain into the second bin. So next I want to take this first bin out. Go ahead and remove the lid. And I'm going to start drilling holes into this one. Now, the bit that I'm using has a 1/4 inch bit on it. It doesn't have to be 1/4 inch. I just found that to be a good size to allow the water to drain, but not worms to escape. And then I'll just kind of drill the holes in. So I've drilled about 16 holes into the bottom of this tub. It doesn't have to be 16. It just, evenly space out your holes so that it allows for drainage across the entire bin. And then once you do that, kind of shake off all the plastic shavings that came off. And then we'll put this bin, inside of the bin with no holes. So this is the bin with holes. It'll drain any excess water off and into the bottom bin. Next, we're going to put shredded cardboard in. You're going to want about 3 inches deep. I just take old boxes that I get from shipping companies, and I've got a shredder that I love. I'll put a link below if you want to shred your own. But also, you don't have to shred it. You can soak your boxes really wet and they tear apart easily, just as long as they're kind of in smaller pieces. You could also just use shredded paper if you didn't want to use cardboard, if you have a lot of paper laying around. All right, so we're at about 3 inches now. So this is way too dry for worms right now. So what we gotta do is we've gotta water it. And it's a lot more water than you think. So kind of mix it up so none of it is dry. We don't want any dry cardboard because worms hate dry. I don't know, you could probably see it like standing water here. Don't worry about that. Just kind of sop it up with the cardboard because it will absorb it. All right, so a good test to see if it's wet enough is you don't feel any dry spots, and then when you squeeze it, it feels like a wet sponge, but you maybe get one drop out of it, but not quite. So it feels wet, and you can almost get a drop out of it, but not quite. If you've put too much water in it and you squeeze and there's multiple drops of water, then you can just add more dry cardboard and mix it in. So next I'm going to add about a tablespoon of azomite. Azomite is full of nutrition, but even more importantly, it's a grit. Worms need grit in their diet because they don't have teeth. They have gizzards, so they need grit to help them break down their food. If you don't have azomite, that's okay. Really finely ground eggshells also work. Next I'm going to add about a cup of worm castings. I know, we're making worm castings and you're like, how am I going to add a cup? Well, you can buy good quality castings. So worms don't eat food, they eat the bacteria that grows on food. These worm castings have a lot of good bacteria in them. So by putting them in now, we're giving the worms something good to eat while the food we're about to put in grows the bacteria. If you don't have castings, you can skip this step. Just wait about a week before you add worms to the bin. Now we're just going to mix this all together. So now we add the food scraps. And I know you're going to ask me for a recipe, but there is really no recipe. It's just kind of the fresh vegetables and fruits that you have laying around that are scraps is what can go in this bin. There are some do's and don'ts. The big do's and don'ts are no meat and no dairy. And it's not that those will harm the worms, it's just that those take a long time to break down and the worms won't get to them for a while. So maggots and rats will find it before the worms do. Chili peppers are another food that you want to avoid putting in your bin, and this could actually harm your worms. The oil that makes the pepper spicy is the same oil that could harm your worms. So we just kind of want to make a thin layer of the food here. I happen to have lettuce, some lettuce here, some banana peel, some apple core. There's some bell pepper tops. Really, it's just whatever fruits and vegetables you are about to throw away, you can now add to your bin. I would start out slow because when you first put worms into your bin, they're going to be a little shy and they're not going to eat right away. So slower, less food is better at first until you get a sense of how fast your worms will eat. After this, I'm just going to cover it slightly with some wet cardboard. And really, just about an inch or so, just to cover the food. This is really just to keep the pests away, to keep fruit flies from getting into your bin. Now for the part you've been waiting for, we're going to add our worms. So this 17-gallon bin will hold about 2,500 worms. So I would start by adding about 500, 600 worms to give them plenty of space to grow. I'm using red wiggler worms because they're good decomposers, but if you're a fisherman and you want to use European night crawlers or African night crawlers, then go right ahead. So check back in about a week and just kind of look through and see if they've eaten the food or not. If they haven't eaten the food, which they may not because you put them in a new environment, then leave it there. If they have eaten the food, then repeat the process of a layer of food and then a layer of cardboard. Then we'll just put the lid on it The lid will help the worms stay in the bin, and it also will control the moisture in the bin. And really, you can put this bin anywhere that's out of the sun. Worms thrive best when it's between 55 degrees and 90 degrees. So you can put this, some people put it underneath the kitchen sink so that they have easy access for food scraps. Some people keep it in the basement. A heated garage is a good place. Really, it's up to you. Hi, I'm Sunny from Sunnyside Soil, and today we're going to go over the most common worm bin problems and how to fix them. Starting with the most common question I get, what's that smell? A healthy, well-kept worm bin should smell like a forest floor, nice and earthy. So if it smells like rotting food, then dig around inside to see if there is, in fact, rotting food in there. If there is, you're feeding them too much because your worms should be eating it all before it gets to the stinky, rotting food stage. If you find rotten food in there, take it out and slow down how much you're feeding. Other smells could include a vomit smell or a sewage smell. I know, gross. But these are signs that your bin has gone anaerobic, which means that there's a lack of oxygen in your bin. Probably because your bin is too wet. To get rid of the smell, if your bin is anaerobic, then just add some dry shredded cardboard. But you can't just dump it on top. You have to really fluff it in. And this is the gross part of worm farming, but it has to be done. Just put on some gloves and a shirt you don't love and really get in there. I like these gloves because they're good and thick. I'll link them below. But once you do this, the smell should go away in a couple of hours. Another problem you might have are worms crawling up the side of the bin, seemingly trying to escape. This can be normal. If you've just started your worm bin, the worms will be curious about their new home and go exploring. But if you've had your bin for about more than a week and your worms are still trying to get out, it's time to do some troubleshooting. First, do your worms have enough food? Hungry worms are going to go looking for a meal. If there is food in there, but it's potatoes or cabbage or something else that takes a while to break down, they might be looking for other food options. Second, is your bin too dry or too wet? Either one could send your worms in search of a new home. To assess, do the squeeze test. If you take a handful of your castings and squeeze, it should clump together. If it clumps together, then it's the perfect moisture level. If it breaks apart, kind of like mine did here. So this bin is a little dry, so I might have to add a little bit more water. You'll know that it's too wet if you squeeze it and water droplets start coming down your hand. Too wet? Add in more dry cardboard and fluff it in, and check back in about a day. Another issue you might have is bugs. Generally, a healthy bin isn't going to attract insects, but it can happen. The most common one is fruit flies. They are annoying, but they won't harm worms. They're only after the food in your bin. To combat fruit flies, you're going to add more cardboard on top to cover the food. Or you could be proactive and add mosquito netting over the bin when you first build it. This will make sure that the flies never get in. Another common problem is mites. Like fruit flies, mites aren't harmful to your worms. Mites are usually an indication that your bin is too wet. If you see mites in your bin, add more dry cardboard and fluff it in to dry out the excess moisture. Depending on where you live in the country, you might call this next pest a potato bug, a pill bug, a doodle bug, but here in Colorado, we call them roly-polies. Again, these aren't going to harm your worms. In fact, they kind of help break down the food material in the bin. So if you find a few in your bin, don't stress out. But if you do find an infestation in there, you need to clear them out. Unfortunately, the only way to get those guys out are to manually remove them. I know it sucks, but just bust out your gloves, put on some music or a podcast, and start picking them out one by one. If you don't, they will eventually take over your bin and eat all the food meant for your worms. Plus, your roommate or significant other might not appreciate the infestation. The one insect you do need to worry about are centipedes. They are worm predators. They will kill your worms. So if you find these jerks in your bin, you need to manually remove them immediately. But I can tell you from experience that they are fast. So you got to be faster. Whew. I know that's a lot of information about what to do when things go wrong, but don't let it discourage you. Overall, worm farming is pretty easy as long as you're diligent. Okay, you've been feeding and caring for your worms for a few weeks now and you're wondering, what's next? How do I know when to harvest the castings? And how the heck do I get them out of the bin? Well, I've got answers for you, so let's get worming. The first step is recognizing when your bin is ready to harvest castings. As your worms eat their way through the food and cardboard, you'll start to see less cardboard and more dark, rich soil, which is exactly what you want. Keep feeding and adding a new layer of cardboard each week until eventually your bin is so full of great soil that there's no more room to add another layer of food on top. At this point, stop feeding the bin and wait 2 weeks. Don't worry, your worms will be okay without food for 2 weeks, and you want them hungry for harvesting. Now there are multiple ways that you can harvest your castings, and I'm going to go over 4 of them. Method 1, bin stacking. In a previous video, we went over how to start a worm bin. Click here if you want to see that, but a key part of that was taking a new bin and drilling holes in the bottom for drainage. For this first harvest method, you do the same thing. Drill in holes in the new bin and then add a layer of moist shredded cardboard and some food along the bottom. Then you'll set the new bin on top of the bin that you want to harvest. Because the worms are hungry, they're going to crawl up from the bottom bin through the holes and into the fresh new bin that you just created, leaving you with mostly worm-free castings from the harvest from the bin and giving you a new bin full of worms to begin feeding and growing your next batch of castings in. The pros of this method, it's very little work on your end. Of all the methods, this is the least labor intensive. The cons, it's going to take a while for your worms to crawl up into the new bin. It could take a couple of weeks or it could take a month. You need to periodically dig through your bin to see if the worms have finished migrating. Another option is to screen out your castings. To do this, take a screen like this one. I'll link to this specific one below, but if you're handy, you could also make your own with a 1/8 inch screen. To harvest, you'll put the screen over an empty bin and place your castings in the screen and start sifting. And you'll notice it catches the bigger debris, but it also catches all the little worms in here too. So the screen's big enough to let the castings through, but small enough to catch the bigger debris and the worms. So at this point you have 2 options. You could sift through this entire bin, which will take you a while, and then remove all the worms that you've sifted and put them in a fresh new bin. Or you could sift out what you need for the day and just take the worms back into its original bin. The pros of this method, it's fast and highly effective. The cons, it's a little bit more labor intensive. It's going to take you some time and effort to sift through this whole bin. And the worms do get shaken up a bit in case you were worried about their feelings. Next, we have the light method. Basically, worms hate light, which makes sense considering that their natural habitat is underground. So for this harvesting method, you put a bright light over your bin, and then you're going to wait about an hour to give them time to crawl deeper into the soil. Then you can just take a trowel and start scraping a thin layer off the top until you reach where the worms have crawled down into. You know, there's like a worm there, so I'll wait a little bit longer for them to crawl deeper. And then you can continue to harvest that way. The pros, it's pretty easy and it only requires a light. The cons, you don't get a lot of castings at a time compared to the other methods where you can harvest the entire bin. And finally, we have the bait method. And by bait, I mean exactly that. You're baiting your hungry worms with food. So for this method, on one end of your full bin, place something that the worms love to eat. I usually use cantaloupe or watermelon. I found that the sugary fruit is a big hit with my worms. Today I'm going to use cantaloupe rinds. So once you have your bait in place, it should only take a few days for your most hungry worms to congregate onto the food. Now that all of your worms are on one end of the bin, you can start harvesting the castings from the other. When you're done, you could start adding shredded cardboard and food slowly to the now empty side of the bed to encourage the worms to migrate back and begin the casting cycle all over again. The pros of this method, you're doing all the work in the same bin, so it doesn't take as much room and it isn't as messy as some of the other methods. And you get more castings at a time than you would with, say, like the light method. The cons: not all of your worms will migrate to the food. Odds are that there will be some worms in your castings that you harvest, which means that you will lose some working worms from your bin. I've tried all of these methods, and personally, I prefer the bait method the most, but that doesn't mean that that's the best choice for you. I suggest you try a few and see which one you like the most. But no matter which method you use, remember, for your castings to be most effective, you should only harvest as much as you need. The longer your castings sit around, the less potent they will be. So once you harvest them, use them on indoor plants, sprinkle around the garden plants, or use them to start some seedlings. So you've got worm castings. Awesome. But if you're new to vermicomposting, you might be wondering, how do I actually use them? Don't worry, it's super simple, and I'll walk you through exactly how to apply worm castings in your garden and your houseplants. Let's dig in. When you're putting a plant in the ground, you want to give those roots the best possible start, and worm castings are an excellent way to do that. Here's what you do. Dig your hole like you normally would. Grab a handful of worm castings and sprinkle it right into the hole. Place your plant on top of the castings. Backfill with the soil you dug out, and then top dress with a little more castings around the base of the plant and water it in. Boom, that's it. No mixing, no measuring, just rich micro-packed soil magic. If you're working with a new pot or a raised bed, here's another great way to use your worm castings. Fill your container or bed with your favorite soil mix. Then simply add a light layer of worm castings on top. This is a slow release way to feed your plants all season long. You'll want to reapply a layer of worm castings once a month. If you're direct sowing your seeds into the ground, make your little indent or trench for planting as you normally would and drop in your seeds. Then sprinkle a layer of worm castings directly over the seeds before covering them with the soil like you normally would, and then water it in. It's a subtle but powerful way to support germination and early growth. And did you know that houseplants also love worm castings? To feed your indoor plants, simply sprinkle a light layer of castings across the surface of the pot. Then take a fork, just a regular old fork, and gently rake the castings into the top layer of the soil, and once again, water them in. This gives your plants a nice nutrient boost without disturbing the roots. Do this every month or so for a happy, thriving houseplant. Worms are amazing little creatures. They live in the ground, aerating the soil while eating their way through decomposing food, leaves, mold, and whatever else they might find in their path. But worms don't have teeth, so how exactly do they eat? First, the basics of their anatomy. Unlike our digestive systems with all its twists and turns, a worm's digestive system is one straight shot from their mouth at the front, where food goes in, down to the anus at the back, where the remnants of the food go out. At their head, they have a small, toothless mouth, so to eat, a worm pushes its pharynx, or throat, out. Kind of like that creature from the movie Alien, but without all the teeth, and grabs microorganisms and little bits of organic matter and pulls it back into its mouth. In its mouth, the worm coats the food with saliva and then swallows. The food moves down the worm's esophagus and into the part of its body called the crop, where it's stored, and then eventually passed into the worm's gizzard. The gizzard is a really important step in the worm's digestive process, because remember, worms don't have teeth, so they can't chew their food. But when they eat organic matter in the soil, they also eat small stones and grit that are naturally found in the soil. So the gizzard uses those stones and grit to grind down the food completely so it can pass into the worm's intestines. In the intestine, the food is broken down even more by digestive enzymes. The natural diet of the worm is heavy on fiber, so worms have 4 different enzymes in their bodies to help them break down all that fiber-rich food so they can absorb the nutrients in it. They absorb the nutrients they need through the blood vessels in their intestinal wall, and then the rest is passed out of their anus in the form of castings, aka worm poop, completing the digestive cycle. And those castings are full of all the nutrients the worms didn't need, making them one of the best garden fertilizers in the world. Do you got a bucket, a drill, and some food scraps? Well, then you're just 20 minutes away from building a DIY worm bin that turns trash into garden treasure, without the smell, the mess, or even needing a backyard. In this video, I'll show you step by step how to turn a 5-gallon bucket into a mini vermicomposting system, perfect for kitchens, patios, kids, or garages. No fancy tools or fuss required. And if you love the idea of this, but aren't the DIY type, check out our website for pre-made 5-gallon kits. No muss, no fuss. All right, let's dig in and make the worm bin. Here's what you'll need. 2 food-safe 5-gallon buckets with lids, a drill with a 5/16 bit, shredded cardboard, peat moss, a few handfuls of worm compost, worm chow, and red wigglers. Step 1, we're going to drill about 6 to 8 5/16 holes into the bottom of our bin. We drill the hole so that leachate doesn't gather at the bottom of the bin, which could lead to a smelly bucket and even drown your worms. And drill some air holes in your lid. Step 2, we're going to take the bucket you just drilled holes into and place it into the second bucket. Now it's time to make this bin into a worm home. Worms like it cozy and damp, kind of like a forest floor. Here's how you make your worm bedding mix. First, you're going to need some shredded cardboard. Don't use the glossy cardboard like cereal boxes. You want to use boxes that come from shipping companies. Next, you're going to want peat moss to mix in with the cardboard. Now add water and mix until it feels like a damp sponge. You know that it's right when you squeeze it and 1 or 2 drops come out, but not anymore. Now you're going to fill the bucket about 1/3 of the way up with this mix. Now you're going to top it with a handful of worm castings. These castings are going to jumpstart the microbes in your bin. This next step is optional, but I like to add our specially formulated worm chow so that the worms have something to eat immediately. You can just sprinkle a little bit on top. It doesn't have to be the whole bag. And finally, the moment you've been waiting for, we're going to place our worms into the bin gently. I like to start with about 500 worms, which is about 1/2 pound. And I like red wigglers because they are fast decomposers. Now is the time that you can add some food scraps, but start out slow. I'm talking like 1 apple core. This is because the worms aren't used to their environment yet and they're not in the mood to eat. Just kind of bury it underneath some of the cardboard and check back in a couple of days to see if they've eaten that. If they have, you can add more food. And now just cover it with the lid that we've drilled the air holes into. Now, healthy, happy worms can eat about half of their weight in food scraps per day once they're established in the bin. So you can feed them fruit scraps, vegetable scraps, ground up eggshells, and coffee grounds. You don't want to feed them meat, dairy, oily foods, onions, garlic, and only feed them citrus sparingly. If your bin starts to smell or your worms are trying to escape, you need to check out our troubleshooting video. And when you're ready to harvest your bin, we've got a great video on that as well. If you've got worm bin questions, drop them in the comments. We're pretty good about answering all of them. You know, people keep asking me what's in my secret recipe for my worm chow, and today I'm going to share that with you. All you do is mix 1 gallon of cornmeal, 1 gallon of mushroom substrate. Now, you might wonder where to get mushroom substrate. The farmer's market is the best place to do that. Usually every farmer's market has a mushroom farmer, and they are more than happy to give you their leftover substrate. 1 gallon of sifted compost, 1 quart of alfalfa pellets. This helps add the protein.
and 1 quart of used coffee grounds. This gets them excited to eat. Once you blend this all together, you have yourself a worm superfood. Personally, I like this recipe because not only is it full of proteins and carbohydrates that makes worms happier, friskier, and bigger, it also has microbiology in it. So you could use this recipe in a brand new bin to get it started. Or you could just give it to your worms at any point during your bin's life cycle. And if you don't want to make your own worm chow, you're in luck because we sell it on our website at sunnysidesoil.com.
Are you baking in the summer heat? Well, I've got news for you. If you're hot, your worms are probably hot too, only their heat tolerance for death is way lower than yours. I'm Sunny from Sunnyside Soil, and today I'm sharing the top 5 ways to keep your worm bin cool during the hottest days of summer. And here's a hint, it's not just about air temperature, it's about thermal mass. Let's dig in. First up, get that bin out of the direct sun. I know, it seems obvious, right? But here's the science. Worms don't care about air temperature. They care about the temperature of their bedding. That bedding acts like thermal mass. What does that mean? It means that the bedding can absorb heat during the day and release it slowly over time, kind of like a sponge, but for temperature. This helps keep the worm's environment more stable, even when the air outside gets really hot. So instead of looking at your phone for the air temp, take a quick soil reading with a thermometer. That's the number that really matters. The ideal worm temp varies by species, but if you're using red wigglers, ideally you want the soil to stay between 55 and 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Worms start to struggle when it gets above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And the more shaded it is, the slower the soil will heat up. Next, increase your bedding depth and moisture. A deeper layer of moist bedding increases the bin's thermal mass, which resists temperature swings. Think of it like a mini underground cave. Worms dive down to escape the heat. Give them that refuge. And here's a pro tip. If your bedding feels like a wrung out sponge, meaning that when you squeeze a handful, only 1 drop comes out, then you're golden. That's the moisture level that worms love. This next one is a game changer. Freeze your food scraps, then bury them in zones in the bin. Not only does this cool the bin as it melts, it gives worms a cooler pocket to retreat to. Just don't overload them with too much frozen food. We want to chill them, not cryo-freeze them. Do you need a little backup? Reusable ice packs can do the trick. Place them in a sealed bag on top of the bedding, not inside of it. Worms can regulate themselves by moving away if it gets too cold. And bonus points if your bin has airflow, because that will also help move the heat out of the bin. And last but not least, I hate to admit it, but size matters. A larger bin holds temperatures more steadily thanks to increased thermal mass. And if you're in a really hot climate, consider burying your bin a few inches into the ground. Nature's insulation is better than anything that you can buy. Look, worms need to breathe too. Passive airflow through vent holes or a nearby fan helps reduce trapped heat and moisture buildup. Just don't blow the fan directly into the bin. That'll dry it out. There you go. 5 proven ways to beat the summer heat and keep your worm bin thriving. Remember, it's all about protecting the thermal mass of your bin, not just the air around it. Do you have your own tricks for hot weather worm care? Drop them in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss more soil-saving tips from Sunnyside Soil.